so glad to have all of you. I see names that I've known forever with League, and I see new names, and hopefully soon I'll get to know your faces as well once COVID is over. I think, Munia, let's go ahead and start some slides. We'll go to the very end, but I want to welcome everyone to Real Talk. This is a two-part panel discussion about voting and how various voters have access or challenges to accessing the ballot. One of the things here at the League is we like to think about the experiences of all voters. We know that when everyone can participate, our election is stronger. Let's go ahead and run through to the very end, Munia, the general slides. So, oh yeah, go back to that one. Just want to remind everyone, this is a slide that you can see on our social media pages, but we love that we have 3 ways to vote here in Ohio. We've had 3 ways to vote for a very long time, and I'm grateful that we have some experts that will be able to talk about that. One of the big things this year is we really want to make sure you make your election plan. It's going to be a high participation year, which is great. We want every year to be high participation. It's especially unique since we are in the midst of a pandemic. All 3 options are good ones. You just need to decide what option works best for you and make your plan. Let's go to the next slide. So let's remember, for absentee voting, this is a brand new thing for a lot of folks. And so you need to request your ballot. Please do that right away. You can get your application. You can print it out at voteohio.gov. You can call that number there on the screen, or your county board of elections. Make sure you sign it. Make sure you fill it out carefully. Get that to your local board of elections. And then they will start processing those requests now, and they will start mailing out ballots on October 6th. You're going to want to make sure you return that right away too. Let's not leave things to the last minute. That's always important, but especially this year. Use the enclosed envelope that the Board of Elections provides for you. Make sure you fill out all that information. And then you can either deliver your absentee ballot or mail it. But if you're going to mail it, it needs to be postmarked by November 2nd. If you are going to deliver it, you need to drop it off by November 3rd to your county drop box. You also can track your ballot at that voteohio.gov. Let's go to the next slide. Just some key deadlines that we really want to make sure that you keep in mind. Deadline for voter registration is October 5th. Absentee ballots will, as we mentioned, will be mailed starting October 6th. We have 28 days of early voting. We're so pleased about that. October 6th through November 2nd. And again, please don't wait to the last minute to request your absentee ballot or to return it. Let's go to the next slide, please. You know, League of Women Voters is a proud member of the Nonpartisan Election Protection Coalition. You'll hear more about that later. The great thing about 866ourvote.org or these various hotlines is that voters can get assistance in real time. It helps us better understand the experience of voters if you report issues that you're seeing in the field. That helps us know when we need to advocate for different policies that can better serve voters. Let's go to the next slide. We are a membership organization, and we would love to have each of you be a member. So if you're not already, that is some information in terms of how to become involved. Go ahead. We also, we are in our 100th year, something that a lot of people don't know. And this is, obviously Women's Equality Day has now passed, but it was a big one this year. The League of Women Voters was was formerly the Ohio Women's Suffrage Association, and we worked to, our first win was actually to get women the ability to vote on school board. We tried multiple times to earn the enfranchisement of women in Ohio, and we're part of getting the 19th Amendment ratified here, along with other organizations, key organizations. We became the League in May 1920 at our convention. That included just an absolute incredible roster of inspiring, trailblazing women. So lawyers, nurses, teachers, business owners, newspaper women, the Federation of Colored Women's Clubs, the Council of Jewish Women, even the DAR. And so at our 100th anniversary here, we would love to have your support. Next slide, please. And we're going to get started here in a second, but we wanted to remind you that this is a two-part series. And our first is, this is our first. Our second one will be 1 week from today, where we will have another roster of incredible speakers. And with that, Munia, could you take me back to, I'm going to introduce our panel. So I am just absolutely thrilled to be joined with friends here. First, Pooja Chaudhuri is with the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law. She's just an absolute dear friend of mine, someone I really enjoy working with. She's a voting rights attorney. She has her bachelor's degree and her law degree from UC Berkeley, and really has a good understanding of the work that's happening on behalf of voters around the state. André Washington is another dear friend. He and I have done so much work together with the A. Philip Randolph Institute of Ohio, an organization that represents and serves labor, members of labor's union, people of color, so African-American laborers. And he is also a member and leader of the state NAACP, a member of the League of Women Voters, and just an overall inspiration gentleman. Kayla Griffin, it's been my honor to get to know her. She is the new director of All Voting is Local in Ohio. Her JD and MPA are from Cleveland State. We have a strong Kent League, so I'm going to throw out there that she's got her bachelor's from Kent State. She is active with the Cleveland NAACP, the Norman S. Minor Bar Association, and so many other things. Just an absolute delight to work with. And Director Terry Burton from Wood County Board of Elections. You know, we love to work with our Board of Elections. They're experts in logistics, and certainly Terry is all the things that need to happen to make sure that votes are counted and that our election is secure and that everything runs well. And so we are honored to have him. He mentions that Wood County is a swing county in its own right, more often than not selecting the President of the United States. So Wood County is a great county to be hearing from, with almost I think almost 100,000 voters. So we're going to go ahead and get started. We do have, but I will just mention again that you can join us next week. We will have a representative from the Hispanic Latino Affairs Commission, from the Freedom Bloc, from Disability Rights Ohio, from the International Institute of Akron, and from the Coalition on Homelessness and Housing in Ohio. Again, that's at 7 o'clock. You do need to re-register, but we would love to have you. It's free. This is an ongoing conversation. So I'm going to open it up and ask Pooja our first question. Pooja, you work in lots of states on voting access. And I would just love to hear from you how Ohio stacks up. How are we doing in terms of election administration, especially as we think about vulnerable voters who may have more challenges accessing the ballot box?
Sure. So, you know, I think, so let's start with the topic that the type of voting that people are most concerned about this year, which is vote by mail. And the reason that we care so much about vote by mail right now is because of COVID, is because, you know, it's hard for vulnerable individuals to go to the polls and vote in person. And so with respect to vote by mail, Ohio's doing pretty well in terms of the state laws, in that unlike many other states, Ohio allows anyone to request an absentee ballot. In many other states, you have to have an excuse. For example, in Texas, there are very narrow, Texas has 5 narrow excuses, and you have to qualify under the 5 narrow excuses to be able to request a vote by mail ballot. Ohio's not like that. Ohio also has a 10-day ballot cure period. So what that means is that, well, it has a 7-day ballot cure period, but you can essentially return your ballot, vote by mail ballot, within 10 days after Election Day. If you are mailing it. If you're returning it in person, then you have to return it by the close of polls on Election Day. So, you know, I think compared to many other states, that is a pretty long period. Now, we can argue as to whether it's sufficient, and that's a whole other topic, but you know, I think that Ohio's doing pretty well in terms of its laws regarding vote by mail access. That's not to say that there aren't barriers, and again, we can talk about that later, but you know, I think that generally speaking, election officials in Ohio have always cared about wanting people to vote and making the vote accessible, which we don't see that in a lot of other states. And so that's what I have to say about that. Hope that's helpful.
I absolutely agree. We really appreciate our boards of elections and all the hard work that they do. André, would you jump in here and kind of continue? You have a long history of working on voting access, voting rights, especially for communities of color. Can you just talk to us about what are the concerns of your constituents this election cycle?
Thank you. First, if I may, I want to thank the League of Women Voters, my league, because I'm a member of the Delaware, a card-carrying active member of the Delaware League of Women Voters. And if I could just do a real quick shout out, my sister Kayla, NAACP, the biggest, baddest, boldest, oldest civil rights organization in the world, where I'm the state treasurer. I have a connection to everybody on here. Pooja, we're working on multiple lawsuits. My good friend Jen Miller, and my brother Terry. I live 4 years in Perrysburg and Wood County. So I have a personal connection with everybody on here. So I'm proud to say I'm first cousins to everybody on this call. I'm going to try not to be long-winded because I can't, but you know, in the African-American community, we have always held the vote very close to our chest. You know, I can go down the list and talk about how we bled, died, and fought hard for women to vote. And even Black women, even though we were part of the suffering, Black women did not get the vote the same time white women got the vote. So this is something that's really near and dear to us. That's why we have things like Sold to the Polls, because of not having access to the ballot box. So we right now, the African American community, we have concerns about the post office. In labor, we love our postal sisters and brothers. They do a yeoman's job. But with all this rhetoric and that's coming from the White House and the new Postmaster General that's been appointed, we're concerned. We're concerned about our ballots. We are also concerned about the ballot box, multiple ballot box. I would hope, Jen, that we get a moment to talk about what just happened in Cleveland, because I've been hotter than a 6-shooter since 12 noon today about that situation there. But we have some serious concerns because unlike other groups, you know, white men, white women, we haven't had the vote for as long as everybody else. So the vote is precious to us. The vote is something we hold close to our chest. It's sacred to us. Real quick story, Jen. You know, this is how the vote is for African Americans. I remember my grandmother back in the day. My grandmother used to get dressed up to go vote. I remember this. My grandmother would put her Sunday hat on. Y'all remember those old folks with those Sunday hats? She would put her Sunday hat on. She was one of those old time grandmothers. She still wore gloves. And she would get dressed up, and my grandfather would put his jacket on and his tie. And I used to always say, they're just going right up the street. Why are they getting dressed up? But it was an honor and it was a privilege. My grandmother was from Mississippi. She couldn't ride in the front of the bus until she got to Michigan. So it was an honor and a privilege. This is something that's very important to us, and having access to the ballot box, being able to cast a vote for a candidate or an issue of your choice in the African American community is sacred. It's sacred with us. I hope somewhere in there you got my answer, but I know it was long, but I'm gonna cut myself off because I can be long-winded. But you know, people like Fannie Lou Hamer, we're sick and tired of being sick and tired. And we're sick and tired of them closing our polling locations, because when they start closing polling locations, it's the African American community that they close polling locations for. Kayla, there's a saying that when America catches cold, African Americans catch pneumonia. And we refuse to catch pneumonia this election. So we are in the A. Philip Randolph Institute and NAACP. We're going to every church, every barbershop, every beauty shop, every grocery store, every hen house, outhouse, Jew joint, and your favorite watering hole. And we're going to educate, register, educate, and turn them out on election day, because this election is too important, but every election is too important. And when we get finished November 3rd, we're gonna then start concentrating on the primary 2021. Because I tell you what this president did, and I know we're nonpartisan, but we are particular about our politics. What this president did, this president just lit fire under millions of African Americans that were engaged in the past. This current president has lit fire in the bellies of African American that was not engaged. And now we are ready. Now, I'm old school. So if it's a fight they want, it's a fight they'll get. Because I'm telling you right now, I'm not taking no butt whoopings.
Well, thank you, André. We will get to drop boxes and signatures, and it's always good to have you, André. I'm going to go to Kayla and then to Terry. So do you want to just pick, I mean, you were called upon in that passionate opening by André, and I'm just going to let you continue on.
I'd like to say one of our slogans is, when we fight, we win. And so there is something that rings true, that if it is a fight that they want, it's a fight that they will get. I think it's important to note that in this time, we are not just asking people to come out and vote. We are asking people to move beyond the ballots, right? And we're asking people to get engaged in this process. And so the engagement process can look different for a variety of people. And we've been doing, voter election protection for quite some time, but one of the things that we're working on at the table in Ohio is election protection. There are a number of ways that people can get involved. Initially, we had the hotline that was up there earlier, and I'm sure you guys will put it back up. But for those who need help with registration statuses, with polling locations, with voter rights and intake process and anything like that, the number is 1-866-OUR-VOTE. So that's one way for people to get involved. And if you are a legal professional, we ask you to come out and sit in the boiler room, answer some of these calls. They are fielding calls right now. And so early voting starts in less than a month. So we need people who are on the line being able to answer calls for voters who have issues that may need assistance. If you are not comfortable with that, we also have other ways to get engaged, right? And so at our table, Common Cause is one of the folks that sit at the steering committee, they have an amazing social media monitoring team. They're doing it right out of their wheelhouse. And so if you are savvy with social media, you can join the social media monitoring team. They will give you the training, they will give you the toolkits, they will give you the exact language to look for so that we can start flagging information, disinformation, and misinformation that is coming out. We have already seen a lot of misinformation and disinformation that is coming out. And so we need people who are at home that are technologically savvy to jump in on this engagement process as well. We already know that members of the league, they are always engaged. And so one of the ways that we're looking to tap members is election ambassadors. There is a training for the ambassador programs. And then we need people who are going to be on the ground. We need people who are in the communities. Before I came into this job, I was sharing with my colleagues before this call started that I volunteered as an election protection monitor well before I was actually paid to do election protection work. And so I was standing outside a board of elections and standing outside of polling locations, particularly in the Ward 7 of Cleveland, to make sure that voters in our neighborhoods were taken care of and protected. So there are a variety of ways to get involved. We need poll workers, we need everybody, and we need all hands on deck. I know we're going to talk about the push, drop boxes, early voting, all of that, but we need people to be engaged beyond just the ballot. We need folks to get active and activated. And so that means organizations, that means sororities and fraternities, that means unions. We need everybody on deck because we really do have a fight on our hands in Ohio. And we saw such even in Cleveland, like our Secretary of State talks about innovation and coming up with innovative ideas to do election administration, and then we see it knocked down. So everything that we try from the Board of Election standpoint, it seems to not be good enough. And so we need people who are on the ground that are working in a coalition and a collective fashion to do this work.
So we'll unpack what she's talking about in terms of Cleveland. You've heard it from André, you've heard it from Kayla. I'm also really unhappy with what's happening there. But before we dig in too far, I want to make sure we do say hello to Terry. So Terry, this feels like a very different election, except, you know, we went through the slide. We have the same three options that we always have, which are great. It's great to have lots of options in Ohio. That's one way that Ohio really is a positive, you know, absentee, early, and in person on election day. But it feels like such a different kind of election. And I would love to hear you kind of pontificate on what's the same and what's really different this year in 2020.
I appreciate you having me part of the panel. Certainly elections officials here in Ohio, certainly all the ones that I've met across the state, really want to facilitate voting. We don't want to be the gatekeepers of voting. And I think it's important that that everybody knows that we're all on the same page, and we want to try to make the process as easy as possible across the board. This will be my 5th presidential election at the Board of Elections. You're right, it does have a different feel. I think that has as much to do with where we are as a society right now. And there's all sorts of things that are playing into that, that some of which, you know, could be predicted, some of which couldn't. But because of that, I think we're particularly vulnerable to that misinformation and disinformation that Kayla brought up. And I think that it is really, really important that we get the truth out there and get the truth in a way that, you know, makes people be able to get their vote counted, get their vote, you know, be where they need to be. And once again, it's not all about the rules, it's about common sense administration of elections that allow us to help the voters that are eligible to get where they need to be and to vote, be it through the mail, through the early voting process, or on election day itself. And I think that while we all feel different here in 2020, it is important to recognize that generally, if you take a deep breath and step back, while I know that, you know, maybe it's not the perfect election setup, It is the same election setup that we've been working with, and it is, you know, worked through the functions in the past. As you said, Wood County is, they voted for Barack Obama. This last election, they voted for Donald Trump. We don't predict elections, but we seem to be a little bit representative in some ways in our county. And you know, where this year is going, I'm not sure anybody can predict, but we certainly hope that we can manage the process in a way that's positive for the voters.
Sorry, I'm going to stick with you for a minute, Terry. I really appreciate that. So something that our members have been working really hard on is funding for boards of elections. We recognize that you had, just we did too as voter advocates, but we had a super long, intensive, hard primary right into a very unique election as we think about running a high turnout election in the middle of a pandemic. And so our members have been calling tirelessly to the federal government asking for funding. We actually were asked about private funds. There's now private funds being made available to local governments. We were called before Ohio was selected, and we advocated for that. So we'd just love to hear what your needs are and how you are getting ready for a scenario where you're going to need, you know, PPE, you're going to need line distancing techniques, you're going to need a younger set of poll workers, a lot more absentee ballot processing. So can you just talk about your capacity to do that work?
We certainly have shifted our focus. You know, we were basically built to run election day. Over the years, the mail absentees have been an increasingly larger portion of the vote. Early voting, you know, continues to grow, but not in this election, in this environment. It's going to substantially shift. And I mean, I believe that it's very likely that by election day, you know, 60% to 70% of the ballots going to come in may be in by election day, which, since we've had the summer to plan, and also we had the experience of the March, not one that we wished we had, but we had it. And because of that, we learned some things from it in regards to larger quantities of mail voting. We learned what we did well and what we needed to work on. And so we needed to gear up in a much different way coming into November with a special focus on those mail ballots. We have built much stronger relationships with our local post office and our local postal officials, because we know that that's important. It's important because for the great majority of those postal workers, they want to do a good job. They want to deliver the mail. They want to do what they're hired to do. And so what we needed to do was build those relationships and try to use their expertise and our expertise to say, how can we best get this done? And so, you know, there's been some redesigning of some of the mail pieces, the envelopes, to try to make them a little more identifiable for postal officials. That's statewide that's been recommended. And once again, just this idea of building relationships. I mean, I have a local postmaster that we meet once a week with to make sure that we're on the same page and they know when our larger mail is hitting. And there's, you know, state contacts through the postal system, you know, asking for, you know, dates and quantities and things. So hopefully we can move that through the process. Certainly the polls are going to be a much different place. It's much like the grocery store, the bank, or anywhere else you go. You know, there's going to be protections for the poll workers. You know, we had to make sure not only our current poll workers, but our new poll workers feel comfortable in this environment. We have to make sure that people that are vulnerable in this environment still can get that ballot. And we have to be able to provide that service in any one of the three ways. It's not just the mail. So somebody that's more vulnerable shouldn't have to just vote the mail. They should also be able to come to our office, be it curbside at our office, or be able to get into our office and cast that ballot. Or if on election day there is a need, you know, then we need to provide that need and meet that need whatever it may be. And so we're working through, you know, a lot of procedures for safety for the voters, for the poll workers, and all that does cost money. And certainly, you know, some of the CARES money that's come through the state, it has been a benefit. We're spending that on extra staff to make sure that we process those requests. And we want that first mailing to be the biggest mailing, and we want it to make sure that it goes out on time and it's right. And, you know, and we want to make sure that when those people show up on October 6th to early vote, it's likely there's going to be a big influx because people are really keyed up about this election. I understand that. And once again, great that they're starting early, but we want to be prepared for that first day because it's going to be a big day. And that first week will be a big week, and it may be the same all the way through. And so, you know, we are preparing in a sense for the best case scenario. And the best case scenario is we get really high turnout and really large participation, where, you know, our democracy works at its best by having people participate.
Thank you. And you know what, Terry, I so appreciate you saying that. That's what we say all the time too, is our democracy works best when we can all participate. Something that a lot of you may not know is that often the Ohio Association of Election Officials and the League and APRI and All Voting is Local agree on improvements. So we have been advocating together on a lot of changes that would be common sense. We all agreed, and we're fighting the proposal that came forth for the primary. We just knew that was too tight of a timeline. So, and I think this is what, and so Terry, first let me just say this, we're gonna be a little bit critical of Ohio for not updating some of these systems. But to be clear, it's not at all that we are being critical of the boards of elections. We are frustrated, I think, as advocates that we continue to talk about what we think voters need, that we saw some challenges during the primary, that really the state of Ohio didn't address the way we would have preferred. And so Kayla, can you just talk a little bit about that? I think one thing that is of interest, I think, is that our absentee ballot system has not changed since it was introduced well over a decade ago, even though the Postal Service has had a lot of changes. Our technologies have had a lot of changes. And so maybe you could talk about what some of those concerns could be for voters and how they can navigate that. And then Pooja, I'm gonna go to you to talk about our legal cases and where those are. So that's your heads up. So Kayla, go ahead.
Certainly. So one of the things that I, as a young millennial, am always frustrated by is this, like, this is how we've always done it. And this is how, you know, our elections have run smoothly like this for a number of years or decades. And I'm like, yes, but there are always improvements, right? There are always ways that we can work and do better. We are getting inundated with calls or emails and questions, particularly from younger voters who are interested in engaging in this process. And they're trying to figure out, how do we request these ballots? What is going on? You know, I'm on campus now, but we might go home. Folks who are doing their voter registration online, when they have to, or the applications online, when we have to print off ballots prior to the ballots or applications being sent to every home, printing is, that's cumbersome. I don't have a printer, and I electronically sign everything. You know, those type of things that we can jump into and say, okay, we need to make things easier and better. We need to have an online portal so that people can send in their applications right online. We have to have processes where when you are filling out your voter registration online, you can have either or the last four of your social or your license ID, but not both. You understand? Like, so those are some of the things that we really should be making access as easy as possible, particularly for those who may be disenfranchised. I'm at my wit's end, right? I was out registering people to vote on the east side of Cleveland, and I was talking to folks, and they're like, you know, I don't trust here, take an absentee ballot application, and they're, oh no, I don't trust it. And you have to help them understand, well, we've always had these processes in place, and folks are like, I don't trust the mail system. I live on the east side of Cleveland, and I don't trust the mail system as it is. So now understanding all the different dynamics that are going into this, folks have a lot of distrust. I talked to a young sister, she just graduated from Cleveland State University, right? She's an amazing advocate. I think she's one of the most brilliant people in Cleveland that I know. She has so much energy, so much love for like her people and advocacy work. She explained to me that at her apartment complex, they don't pick up the mail. I was like, what do you, no, just drop it in the, she was like, no, what you're not understanding is we don't have mail pickup at our apartment complex. And it's like that at many apartment complexes over on East 79th, East 81st Street of Cleveland, Ohio. And that was one of the things that I was like, it was foreign to me because I've always had a mail, postal services who would pick up my mail. She's like, no, we don't have that. So this conversation that every mailbox becomes a drop box is problematic for people that don't have mailboxes to pick it up at. It's problematic for neighborhoods that don't have mailboxes. She explained, well, I was going to go down and buy some stamps, and the post office that's nearest me, they were out of stamps. So then I don't have a car. I'd have to get on the bus and go all the way downtown to the post office. And it just makes us wonder, you know, how is voting, how do we engage a next generation of voters who are saying, we have seen all of the different ways that you have impeded the process. We want the process to be easy for us. This next generation is like, this is too cumbersome and we don't want to do it. This is not, you know, we don't see people on the ballot that really is speaking our language, and we don't want to vote. We don't think that we need to be engaged. And this is particularly the point where we can say, no, we have some innovative ideas. We can make sure that, right, how can you be out of, no, seriously, how is the post office out of stamps? I could not imagine like going to the post office and they telling me we don't have stamps. But in Black and brown communities, these are what people are dealing with. These are what voters are dealing with.
So before I go to you, Pooja, I'm going to let André jump in here, because one of the things we've been wanting, and we've talked about prepaid postage for a long time in Ohio. It's not a new conversation for advocates or election officials, this idea of having the state pay for postage for ballots. André, the controlling board did not support Secretary of State LaRose's request to allow him to pay for postage. Can you just talk about what that means in just everyday Ohio terms?
First of all, I want to make sure that I was reading things correct, that the Republican Party exchanged a member off the controlling board at the 11th hour. Did you guys hear that?
It is very possible.
Yeah.
I do know that it went down to a voter. I haven't had a chance to look yet, André. It's been a long day.
I believe I'm correct. And so that they can secure their votes. But again, we're nonpartisan, but I'm speaking truth to power. So, you know, this postage paid, like Kayla was saying, I have some members at my church. When I was talking to them about paying postage, this one young man, he asked me what a stamp was. He didn't know what a stamp was. Another young man, he was in his I think he was about 29, 30. He said, people still use stamps? And where do I get it from? Now we have a whole generation that's being disenfranchised because they're so used to picking up their phone and doing everything that they do right here on their phone or on their tablet. So if I don't know where to get a stamp at, if I don't know what a stamp is, it's like a rotary phone. I've heard of them, but I don't know how to use it. I don't know what to do with it. So, folks, we have to, if we're trying to educate a whole new generation, then we have to work with them, and we have to sit down and listen to them. The other thing with the stamps, you just can't go and buy one stamp. I don't know where you can do that at. So if I have a single mom and and all of a sudden it's 3 days before payday, and she's down to her last dollar, and she's trying to figure out. And folks, if you don't know this, this happens in the African American community, and I'm sure in yours too. She's trying to figure out, do I take my last dollar and buy a book of stamps, which I will only use one, or do I put food on my table? Those are decisions that African Americans are trying to make. And until people sit back and listen to my community, listen to young folks, that new generation is coming, because that new generation is going to be taking care of me in about 10, 20 years from now. Until that happens, we will not see democracy in the great state of Ohio. I will say this, I'm from Michigan. Don't hold that against me. When I came to Ohio and I found out about early voting, I said, glory, hallelujah, thank you, Jesus. I can go to the Board of Elections and I can vote prior to the election and get it done and over with. Oh my God, everybody should be doing this. Because when I lived in Michigan, you had to give them a reason why you wanted an absentee ballot, and the only day to vote was the first Tuesday in November. So folks, we have this beautiful mechanism here in Ohio, and yes, I am an implant, this beautiful mechanism of voting. But we need to make sure that access is accessible to all Ohioans, not just the privy, not just because I have this job making $150,000, I can leave in the middle of the day and go vote at any time. No, we got to look out for Ray Junebug and Ray and all their cousins. We got to make sure that that single mom, who I was a single dad, and when I got off work, if I was running late to pick up my kids, the babysitter charged me per minute. Per minute, yeah, oh yeah, per minute. So as a single parent, I know the frustrations of going to the poll, and there's a long line, and I got to figure out, do I stay here and vote, or do I run over here and pick up my kids? So we got to look out for that single mom or dad. We have to look, you know, the Bible says, in as much as you've done unto the least of them. Thank you.
Thank you, Andre. And I just want to tell you that I was also a single mom who relied on the food bank, relied on soup kitchens when she was little. And let's keep in mind that, yeah, there's only one place where you can buy individual stamps, and that's the post office. But if your location is out of stamps even, that's hard. But in addition, if you're trying to limit trips, that can be difficult as well. So Pooja, let's jump into drop boxes and what is going on with drop boxes here in Ohio.
Sure. Yeah, no, I think that what Kayla said, and Andre and Terry's sort of different perspectives really bring it all together, in that, you know, at the Lawyers Committee, we do not want to file lawsuits. We understand that it is close to an election officials are trying to get their ducks in a row, like Terry said. And so it's disruptive to change the process or advocate for changes. However, when there are things that election officials on the state level do that increase voter costs to a significant extent, that's when we do file a lawsuit, right? And so with respect to the drop boxes, on August 12th, Secretary LaRose issued a directive that banned counties from installing more than one ballot drop box across the county, except at the Board of Elections office. Now, many counties, including especially the more populated urban counties like Cuyahoga, Hamilton, had election commissioners saying that they wanted to install multiple Dropbox sites because it would help the individuals who lived in those counties to not have to rely on the Postal Service. And you've gotten a picture that Kayla painted of the apartment building that doesn't have mail service. So if you can imagine during a pandemic, you know, if you're an individual who is at high risk, you can't go and vote during the early voting process, can't go on election day, then effectively the only way you can vote is by mail. And so the question is, does the Secretary of State's directive, does Ohio statute prevent the Secretary of State from telling counties that they can have multiple ballot drop boxes, right? And B is that if it doesn't, then does it violate the constitutional rights of individuals? And so that is the question that's being litigated in court. As our plaintiffs, we have the 3 organizational plaintiffs are the League of Women Voters, APRI Ohio, and NAACP of Ohio. And then we have 7 individual plaintiffs who are saying that the only way that our members, many of our members, and that we can vote is by mail. We don't trust the postal system. We are unsure whether if we put our ballot in the postal system, whether it would actually be delivered, especially in urban counties. And the fact that, one drop box, especially in urban counties where you have, like Cuyahoga County, where you have 858,000 registered voters, is really not enough when you look at the access issue as compared to many counties that have fewer registered voters. And so there's a companion state court case. The judge is supposed to rule on that case tomorrow. As to whether the statute, or on the statutory question of whether Ohio statutes prohibit counties from having multiple ballot drop boxes. And the League and APRI and NAACP are on a companion federal case that addresses the constitutional concerns that, even if the secretary did have authority to do what he did, the impact is massive disenfranchisement of many voters. And we have several experts who've done studies to show that the voter costs during a pandemic, during a time where many counties do not have those tight relationships with the Postal Service, right? Where many counties have experienced their sorting machines being taken out or mailboxes being removed, that this increases voter costs. And that would actually lead to disenfranchisement of voters, which is certainly something that we do not want.
Thank you for that. And we'll talk about Cleveland, but Terry, I really did appreciate you talking about building a stronger relationship with the Postal Service. Again, for us, I think as voter advocates, it's not that we're trying to beat up on the Postal Service either. It's about looking at the weaknesses in the systems and how some of our most vulnerable populations are not served well. So if we think about a group that we didn't talk about are persons with disabilities who may not be able to drive, and the drop box might be a couple towns over and the transit system doesn't even get there, right? So I have a couple questions for you. Maybe you want to expand a little bit on the conversations you've had with the Postal Service, but then I'd also, just really like to hear about your advice for voters who are uncomfortable voting in person, but are also uncomfortable putting it in the mail. Who can drop off a ballot might be part of that conversation, on those logistics.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things that kind of have been floating through my mind with the conversation. Pooja's right that the elections officials abhor change during an election because what we need to run the best election is to know the rules going in. Now, that doesn't mean that I don't agree necessarily with André as well, because we don't love all the rules that we're given. Would online, requests, if they had an online system that would allow us to get those into our processes easier and be able to have people do it through their phone? Absolutely. As a long-term goal for us, we wanted it this year, but this summer we were all in favor of it. If it comes next week, then I'm not in favor of it because we don't have the infrastructure to make that happen. But, as a rule, that's a great thing to advocate for. And I do think that there are people that make decisions on stamps, either from both, I don't use them at all, to I can't afford them. And I understand that. And even the prepaid postage, once again, if we were talking a month ago, yeah, we were all on board, and our association advocated for that in the summer. But, just because, so in the end, we have to administer the rules we have. And I guess, it's not perfect, but we want to try to administer and get through the process and overcome those as best we can. Who can drop off at a drop box? It's a family member, is what the rule is. And they have a long list of who qualifies as family. And, I think that, if somebody's able to, get somebody to get them, maybe to the drop box. I know, once again, there are certain physical barriers, depending on where they are, whether they have access to a car, whether they have access to public transportation. Once again, depending on the environment that you're in, and we are all in very different environments. I do not know the problems of a Cuyahoga County. I also don't know the problems of a Monroe County. Because they're very, very different counties. One's very, metropolitan, one's very rural. And so, we all have to try to figure out how best to serve the voters in our county. And with the local boards of elections, we most of the time ask the state to do their very best to stay out of our way, because we know how to serve our voters. And I know that, the folks in Cuyahoga and those other counties, they're trying to serve their voters, and sometimes they get barriers put up to them, and we all do in different ways. But we want to try to facilitate, once again, with the rules we have, we're going to try to move forward and try to figure out how can we get those voters within the rules that we have to be able to do what they need to do. And when people call our office, we do everything we can to try to find solutions for them, because that's really the key. It's not, we all know what the problems are out there, and I'm not entertained, but I find it interesting that there's distrust of the postal system from every side, in the fact that it seems like there's certain people that think it's the leadership of the postal system that may put up barriers, and then have other people that tell me it's the workers of the postal system that are going to put up barriers. And once again, I can only speak about our experience, and our experience is if you engage those postal people at your local level, we can at least try to, once again, come up with solutions and maybe, identify where the problems are and then move forward on that. And
I just want to appreciate you for that, Terry. And look, I just want to say too that, we don't like to throw lawsuits last minute. One of the things that happens in Ohio is it seems like we can all show up and agree. So it was actually in January that the representative of the election officials showed up and testified in support of online absentee requests, along with the league, along with Secretary LaRose himself, or it might have been his Olivetti, his ombudsman. But and then we had the primary happen, and we all were working so hard. And there becomes a point where you realize in Ohio, unfortunately, that some of our biggest reforms have been done through legal efforts. Early voting was done through a NAACP lawsuit. The initial election administration plans and post-election audits, which I think we all really support now, was through a lawsuit, and so it is unfortunate for all of us that we can all see, us from the voter side, you from the logistics Board of Election side, we can see common sense improvements and can't always get the state to agree. So Kayla, let's just go ahead and talk about what was happening here in Cleveland. So what happened in Cleveland was they came up with a new idea. Okay, so we can't have drop boxes. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna send bipartisan teams to some libraries, and that way voters can just get to that library, we'll be there, we'll collect your ballot, and then we will directly transport that back to the Board of Elections to be processed. What happened today, Kayla?
Yeah, so I think before we even, the way they came up with this ingenious idea is very similar to how they do folks who are in nursing homes and how they are doing folks who are in jail for jail voting. It is administering a team, as you said, of bipartisan election workers to go out and just collect the ballots. So this is already within our grasp. This is what we are doing because they cannot go into senior facilities because sent out ballots and they are collecting them. They're going around and collecting them. And so now in Ohio, in Cleveland, Mayor Frank Jackson, he asked months ago, he said, I'll open up our recreation centers and our libraries to serve as drop box locations for you all. Well, that was immediately, that was deemed unconstitutional. It was not within lines of the directive, excuse me. And today there was talk that we will have 6 locations where we will have teams, they will collect it. Rather immediately, we got notice, we got so excited, it was like, okay, here we go. Rather immediately, we had notice that the Secretary of State blocked that and moved to block that within the city of Cleveland. And so I do not practice election protection law, so I'll leave that to Pooja. But one of the things that sparked me as very interesting is that the same law that the secretary had touted about directives and the Board of Elections directives that is written into the ORC, it says that the board can administer how they will collect. And it says that if it is a board of election officials, they can stand outside and somebody can give them the ballot, and that is how we are able to collect ballots at the jail, our local jails, or at the nursing home. But to take this ruling and invalidate it really, in my mind, goes beyond the scope of what we are allowed to do and really impedes the process here, because we are trying to make sure that voting is efficient for everybody. And here in Cleveland, we have come up with some amazing ideas. And within, I don't even think it was an hour, within an hour, there was a news story that said, this has been struck down by the Secretary of State as invalid and it violates the directive. And so this is what we're dealing with in Cleveland. I would love to hear some legal analysis on it. And that's just like my novel reading of the, a once over of the ORC, but it seems like it's well within the rights.
Okay, so we'll hand that over to Pooja. We have about 10 more minutes of conversation. So we're going to hand it over to Pooja to talk about that from a legal sense. But I will just say for us voter advocates, we keep trying to come up with creative ways to improve access during this complicated election. So do our friends, the boards of elections. And it's frustrating when we see these things. Pooja, what's your thought here on this issue?
Yeah, no, I think, André, did you have something you seem to...
Oh, yeah, this has really made me mad, and I just leaned towards my screen here. And I want to make sure we have enough time to give the legal, because I'm not an attorney and I don't try to play one on TV, but I'm just plain old André from around the corner and up the block. And my opinion in a quarter will get you a cup of coffee, but I'm gonna give you my opinion. I'm getting ready to throw LaRose under the bus. But before I do that, I'm gonna let you guys know, I love LaRose. But I don't mind throwing him under the bus, because I also love my Uncle Charlie Wu. But but my Uncle Charlie Wu got sticky fingers, and when something comes up missing at my house, I throw him under the bus. So if I can do my uncle, I can do LaRose. You cannot have both. You cannot talk out of both sides of your mouth. You just can't do it. You cannot sit there and say that, oh yeah, I'm all for multiple ballot box. I just want to get an opinion from the Attorney General, and before he gives that opinion, you pull your opinion back, and then you issue a directive. You can't do that. You can't tell Andre Washington one thing on Tuesday and then do something else on Thursday. That's not happening. So quit talking out both sides of your mouth. If you want to do the right thing, you do it, and then suffer the consequences later. Charge forward doing the right thing, and then let the chips fall where they fall. you know, don't get upset if your party's mad at you. Don't get upset if these group of people over there are mad at you. You are the Secretary of State for all Ohioans. It is a nonpartisan position. Do the right freaking thing, period. Thank you.
Good. And legally, Pooja,
Yeah.
Kansas Secretary of State, do the right thing.
Not as passionate or interesting. But so, you know, one thing that I did want to address before going into today's ban, which is a different ban, is that in terms of changing rules for election officials, one reason, we're seeking very narrow relief in the Dropbox case. And what essentially we're asking is for the court to lift the ban, not for the court to impose any affirmative relief and say, counties, you are going to be required under the law to undertake installation of drop boxes, right? And so these are some considerations given that we've had to do this so close to an election. Literally all we want is for the ban to be lifted so that counties that want to install more drop boxes, like Cuyahoga County, which has said that, yes, we are going to do this and we have funds to do it, and we, you know, it's going to increase access, can do what they want to do. So it's a way to preserve county, as Terry said, you know, serving the voters of your county, right? So someone sent, I think Jen, you sent me this article this afternoon, and I was in a deposition for the ballot Dropbox case, and I was reading it and I was like, oh no, I need to, you know, put on my poker lawyer face because I was mad as well. But it seems that so we were talking to a Cuyahoga election official, commissioner, who said that the county has been working on this plan, right, to send bipartisan election officials to libraries and other sites to pick up ballots as a way to sidestep the directive. Now, Ohio law is silent on this issue. It specifically, as Kayla said, enumerates that you can send bipartisan officials to the jail. You can send bipartisan officials to an individual who is disabled or at their home to pick up ballots. There is nothing that prohibits sending bipartisan officials to any other location. However, the statute does say that when you return an absentee ballot, it has to be returned to the director of elections. And so that is what Secretary LaRose is using, I think, in order to argue that the statute, that he has authority and that absentee ballots have to be returned directly to the director of elections. Where does the director sit? At the board of elections, and bipartisan officials are not the director of elections, and that is an exception in the statute. So I think that's his reasoning. Now, there are many counter arguments against that. One of which is the statute is still unclear as to what, you know, director of elections means, and there's other parts of the statute that I think could be interpreted as other places as well, not just the Board of Elections. And you know, so there are different ways to look at it, and that is, you know, I think that's his reasoning for banning multiple drop boxes, and that's his argument in court, in both state court and federal court. That's what he's saying.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. And thank you for clarifying that we have a very narrow request here at this point. There's so much more that we would want out of drop boxes, but it's quite narrow.
Yes.
So let's go ahead, and a couple things that I want to just make sure we cover. Terry, two things. Have you had to move or consolidate a lot of polling locations? And if so, what advice do you give? And then the second piece is tell us about poll workers and the need for them.
We have not moved many. We moved one because a location was not willing to be open under the pandemic circumstances. But we had made some moves over the past probably 5 years of consolidating down to fewer locations. As a general rule, we're continuing to keep communities together. We've tried to recognize, even within cities, there's certain communities, and so when we're centralizing, we're trying to be mindful of that as we go through that process. And with the larger numbers of mail voters, some people don't believe this, but we really can gain some efficiencies where we give more voting machines in a central location, move lines a lot faster, letting the poll workers work together to get people through. It also gives us some efficiencies in poll workers making better decisions because there's a few more thoughts that are gathered together. And so maybe the person with the first and loudest voice isn't correct all the time. And so sometimes having a few more people there to make a decision based on what everyone heard at training versus just a single individual has also helped in consolidating and kind of making a better voter experience. In the pandemic here, as we're thinking about PPE and distancing, we're gonna have a lot of extra help that we're putting at the polls to make sure there is a need for poll workers statewide. There's no doubt that on a state level, we need poll workers, and we can never have enough extra poll worker substitutes, people willing to go in, that morning if necessary. And I know the boards are looking to train additional people. We're training more people for election day. We're training more people for that backup role, because none of us know what the future is going to bring here, particularly with the pandemic and health situation. And so we want to make sure we're as prepared as possible, because the one thing that we can't do on election day, and I know we as an association, the thing that keeps me up at night is not having enough people at polls. We want to make sure that we do that and that we are providing that experience.
Yep, I mean, we have so many poll workers who are members of the league. We consider them the backbone of electoral democracy. They're the ones who check the voters in and make sure all is great. Do you want to talk for a minute about youth at the booth? Because I think a lot of people don't know about youth at the booth, Terry.
Yeah, the youth at the booth movement, a lot of counties are using high school kids. If they're 18 and they're seniors, they can work the polls. Once again, that was an area we wanted to see expanded. We wanted to see that lowered to 17 and possibly juniors.
Well, it is actually, so Terry, it is 17-year-old seniors, but yeah, we did, together we worked, we were hoping to get 16 and 17-year-olds, juniors and seniors, but yeah, go ahead, keep going.
No, I misspoke on that. I appreciate you correcting me. Yeah, so we are always looking, and the thing that we really want is we want to get young people engaged. And once again, if you work the polls, I think the likelihood of you being more involved in the voting process and moving through that is better. It gives us, in a situation where older workers are vulnerable, a better opportunity to get, bodies out there. But certainly, we want to provide that connection with younger people. And the sooner that we can build that in innumerable ways, the better off we all are going to be.
Thank you for that. Okay, so I'm going to give each of you 30 seconds. If you have one thing to say to voters this year, what would you say? And we're going to go in alphabetical order. So we're going to start with André, then Kayla.
I would encourage voters to become poll workers. They need about 35,000 across the state. I would encourage younger people to become poll workers so they can see democracy right up front. That is the best way to see democracy. You're right there, right up front. It's a long day. It's not a whole lot of money, but at the end of the day, it's like going to church. You always feel good afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you, Andre. Kayla, last word.
Make a plan, vote early, and engage beyond the ballot. And so make your plan. Make sure one of the things that we're running on my other hat for NAACP Cleveland, it's called I Got 5 on it. It's a colloquialism on a song. It says that I'm gonna help register 5 people to vote. I'm gonna help register or get 5 people to the ballots or get their ballots in, help them. And I'm gonna get 5 people to fill out the census. So make sure you get 5 people.
I love that. I love that song and I love your application of it. Pooja?
Go vote, do what Kayla told you to do what Andre tells you to do, do what Jen tells you to do. And if you encounter problems, then call 866-OUR-VOTE.
And finally, last but not least, it's been great to have you, Terry. Advice to voters?
I feel like I should cede my time to Andre because I just love listening to him.
We all do.
But I liked what Kayla said. Make a plan. There's 3 options. So pick the option that works for you in your situation and move forward with that. And if you need help, call your Board of Elections, engage with us so we can help you to get through this process.
Thank you so much. So with that, we are going to head to our keynote speaker of the evening. But first, I was really hoping, Cynthia, would you just say hello to everyone really quickly so we can see your face?
Oh, okay. Wasn't expecting that.
I know, but you're a beauty, and I want everyone to see your face. Oh, we can't see you. There she is. I just want to, Cynthia is one of our newer Ohio League volunteers. She helped put this entire event together. She's out of the Hudson area. And so I just wanted to make sure we gave you a round of applause for getting this Real Talk put together. It's been a really great evening. So thank you, Cynthia. We're so glad to have you. And now I also want to make sure Alice and Munia and Michael are also on helping us. What's beautiful about League is that is a combination of volunteers and staff, and our people are our greatest resource. And with that, I'm so thrilled to introduce Dr. Debra Turner. I've had the pleasure of meeting Dr. Deborah a few times. She comes to the League originally from Iowa and the Des Moines area. She's been on the LWVUS board since 2016. She's got her JD from Drake University and her MD from the University of Iowa. She's part of the Iowa Women's Hall of Fame. She lives in Nebraska and has worked for over 30 years as a gynecologic oncologist. And just really am so pleased that she is our new president of LWVUS. And so just would like to welcome you, Doctor, and we're so excited to hear what you have to share with us this evening.
Well, first of all, thank you so very much for having me. I mean, Jen, this has just been, I've had such a good time listening to you guys. I wish you could just keep talking. I've learned so much. And I have to say thank you to Andre for taking me to church tonight.
Yeah, that's our Andre. He always does. We love him.
And I love to hear the things you've been talking about and the issues you've brought up, because one of the things you recognize within our country is that we all share so many difficulties, so many problems, and so many positive things too. But when it comes to voting, and when it comes to access to voting, and it comes to making democracy strong, we have issues that each and every one of us across this nation is sharing. And so having listened to you tonight, I've kind of come up with some things I wanted to talk about that may have been a little bit different if I had started off the evening. So, and I do apologize for being late. I got stuck at work, so I truly apologize. But 3 things really stuck out to me tonight as I was listening to you and listening to your team. And by the way, Ohio, you are just knocking it out of the park. I mean, there is, quite frankly, many states around the country are doing a lot of great things, but you guys are so engaged. I mean, it is just really awesome. And I think you should get kudos for that. So I just wanted to put that out there, okay?
Let me just say that LWVUS is always such a great support to us. So it's a team effort.
Well, you know, we're definitely glad to be there on all levels. And I'd say I started out this journey like in small town America. My hometown's actually Mason City, little town in northern Iowa. And I started learning about voting when I was, as my dad used to say, knee high to a grasshopper. And because my mother was engaged in community activities, and she would take us to the voting booth with her, and we would trail along with her when she was dropping lid or knocking doors. And that's how we, you know, really started to understand what it meant to be civically engaged. And I think a lot of us, and a lot of you probably on this call tonight, understand that you maybe came to your civic engagement at your mother's knee, as I say it. You know, and everybody doesn't necessarily have that, but each and every one of us can serve to be somebody else's mother's knee, okay? But the three things that really struck out to me tonight were these. One, intergenerational conversation. I'd like to talk about that a little bit more. Education and access to it, and really knowing what the problems are. And I'm going to start with the first thing. I listened to you talk about the problems about, André was talking about the stamp, and I can't remember whether Kayla maybe was talking about the mailboxes and the lack of mailboxes. And as the country has been in this big frenzy about mailboxes being taken away, which is obviously an incredibly sad thing and has nothing to do with our postal workers, let's be clear. But the fact that a lot of folks don't understand that some people don't even have mailboxes to be taken away. And that is a problem that we need to talk about. And so when I talk about bringing up the problems that we have, we need to understand what the problems really are. The issue about the stamp and how there are some young people who've never used a stamp, never had a reason to use a stamp, you know, and so they're not used to that process and they do things differently. So like, you know, Kayla said, we need to start looking at different ways, not only to get access to the ballot, but looking at really how people engage with the process. So that we're talking about then is intergenerational conversation. And intergenerational conversation is one of my really big concerns and really big issues for the league at this time, and actually for our country. Because as you were talking tonight, and we're talking about how young people access the ballot or what they feel about voting, and we're talking about us older folks with the gray hair and, you know, how we feel about it and what we've come up believing or how we engage, and there's a gap. We have to get to the point where we're talking to each other about what the issues and the concerns are. So from a league point of view and a national league point of view and a local league point of view or a local community point of view, what we have to do is start making the effort to bring quote unquote older folks and quote unquote younger folks together and just starting to sit down and talking about what are the issues and listening to each other. Because I'm willing to bet there's a significant group of folks my age who are clueless that somebody maybe doesn't use stamps, because we just assume you do. By the same token, there are younger people who are going like, why would we use stamps? Which is a good question sometimes, okay? But if we don't know, that is a problem and a barrier to helping each other understand where we're at. We're never going to move the dial, okay? And that rolls me back into education and education. And one of the things that sometimes I will be totally upfront about, at the league, we've sometimes had difficulty with or concerns about, or like, the league telling people how to do things. Like, we know how to do voter education, or we know how to do voter registration, whatever, and going to organizations and saying, this is how you do it, as opposed to engaging with other groups or with other organizations and saying, you know, how do you do things? Or is there a way we can do it better? Because I heard that message too. Is there a way for us to transform the process so we're doing it better for everybody? And that's a difficult thing, but that's an educational piece. And you educate each other by listening to each other. We educate each other by learning. And I think about, so that thing brings me back to education is my heart besides the other things I do. I think about this, the issues that, you know, were brought up tonight about civic engagement, and how one of the things that we've lost in our educational system is talking about what it means to be a democracy, talking about what it means to be civically engaged, and teaching folks and kids as they grow up how important it is and what a difference it can make. And this is a fault not of kids or those who are being educated, because they don't write the curriculums. They don't tell you what they're going to learn in school. They may tell you what we're teaching them is not correct or we need something more, but it's the quote unquote adults at the table, using the term very loosely, that are making these decisions, and we are neglecting our duty to help them understand what civic engagement means. And this then comes kind of to one of my other really major points, is that through all of this, we talk about the barriers to voting. You guys have just been great tonight explaining that. And I've learned some new things that I'm going to be taking back to talk about at the national level too, that Ohio has, has brought up, but also some best practices. I think the other pieces that missing is that we don't need just reform in Ohio. We don't need just reform in Iowa. We don't need just reform in California. We need systemic reform. And a lot of that systemic reform really needs to be from the top down, but it may have to be pushed from the bottom up, okay? And in order to achieve systemic reform, we have to do all those things. We have to have intergenerational conversation. We have to have education. We have to understand what the problems are. And I really believe that we need to look at best practices from every state around the union. We need a best practices consortium or something that says, this is what's worked in Ohio, so why can't it work in Alabama? This is what works in California, so why can't it work in New Jersey? But we get caught in our own bubbles, and that's understandable because our bubbles have so much bubbling around in them right now that, you know, the top's about ready to blow off, right? But I think as we look forward, you know, and even beyond this election, is that we need to start really talking about what are the best practices and what can we do to reform this system systemically from the top down and from the bottom up, and who does need to be at the table, including all of our youth, all of our adults, everybody who is educator and non-educator. And we need people bringing problems to the table that are real problems, you know, because one of the other things we do is, and I'm guilty of this, just ask my kids, that, you know, I tell them what the problem is and how they need to fix it. And sometimes they're just saying, okay, now listen, mommy, auntie, that's, you know, one of my kids is my niece and one's my son. And they're going, no, this is what the issue is. You need to listen to us. So I hope that we step away from this tonight. And the message I would like to put out there is we really need to delineate the problems, because you can't make action plans unless you know what the problem is. You know, you can't solve the problem about the stamp issue unless you knew there was an issue about stamps, okay? Nobody knew that, so how could you fix it, okay? You can't tell people what they need to learn unless you listen to what they're asking you, what they want to know. So when it comes to education, we have to figure out where the needs are. And finally, we can't do this unless we talk across generations. And if I don't carry any message for the next couple of years in my presidency at the League, is that intergenerational conversation is the only way we're going to change things, because that's the only way we're going to understand what the issues are. And the fact is, you know, I'm going to be coming to that day where I'm going to be sitting back and assuming that my children and your children and the children that are coming after this, my grandchildren, if any of my children ever decide to have children, I don't know if that's a good idea or not, you know, but that they're going to be the ones making the point, and they're going to be the ones running the country, and they're going to be the ones doing, you know, taking care of us. And so unless we talk across generations, we're never, ever going to move that dial. So this has been an enlightening evening. This has been a fascinating evening. I could listen to you, these guys, discuss these things all day, because I've gleaned so much from this conversation. And so I hope that I will appreciate what you've done. I appreciate what you do. And I really am going to be taking some of these things back to the league at the national level and discussing what was discussed with Ohio this evening. So thank you for having me. And I sincerely apologize for being late today. So I apologize.
You know, we are so excited. I can personally say I was so excited when you were elected president, because I've just had really wonderful interactions with you, and you were always welcome to hang out with us in Ohio, virtually or in person. You know, you are a fellow Midwesterner, and we appreciate that. I'm also a small town gal, so I appreciate that too. You know, let's just talk about one thing. As you talk about intergenerational, and you talk about, you know, what's something you say to young people in your life or in the league about voting? You know, one of the things, we did a focus group. I do appreciate your emphasis on listening. We did a focus group in 2018 with young people. And it was, we had individuals of African-American, white, Native American, and Asian descent. We had young people that were in the military. We had binary, non-conforming gender, you know, various different groups, some in private college, state college, local community college, no college at all just yet. And the through line was whether they had someone shepherding them through this very confusing process. Those that were clearly going to be lifelong voters were someone who had just an older person shepherding them through. So what's something that you say to young people that you think we should be making sure that we impart?
I basically tell them two things. I start with first that, you know, we kind of started out this conversation was about voter suppression. And I look at them and say, think about this just a moment. You know, depending on what group you're in or where you live, if you're a young person, there appears to be some level of attempting to suppress your vote by someone somewhere. And so I say, first of all, if your vote wasn't significant and it didn't count, why would somebody try to suppress it? I mean, it clearly has value. So that's one thing I tell them. But then the other thing I tell them is, you know, because one of the things you've heard young people say is, well, why should I vote? You know, maybe my person's not on the ballot, or maybe they're not talking exactly about the issues I want. And I say, here's the key. Your vote is power. And for every one of you that votes, you're going to have the opportunity to, one, put somebody on the ballot next time that thinks like you, wants the things that you want to do, and understands your problems. And the other thing is that you're also going to have the ability to possibly take away someone who you don't think should be there. So your vote can make a difference. You have the opportunity to bring your issue forward and to put somebody in there who you think is the right person, but you can't do that. You cannot do that unless you vote. So those are the two things that I tell them. So.
Awesome. That was beautiful. Thank you so much. Just a reminder, there are 3 ways to vote. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide. We like to always do our reminders at the end. You can get many images by following us on social media. We're on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and I believe our intern started a TikTok. I haven't seen it yet. I'm not really a TikTok knowledgeable. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide. Key dates. I think we heard this. Make sure everyone's registered. Hey, remember that there are people who have been removed from the roll, so we don't want to just register folks, but help them check their registration, which can be done online. Absentee ballots, go ahead and request yours now, knowing that the boards of elections will start putting those in the mail on October 6th. 28 days of early voting, but remember that each week has different hours, so you're going to want to check that. And please don't wait to request your absentee ballot or to return your absentee ballot. Next slide. Here's those election protection hotlines. Kayla talked about how she was doing election protection before she was at All Voting is Local. My start in election work was actually as an election protection poll monitor in 2004. And my own experiences were used in a lawsuit about disability access by the league and after that. So these are the various hotlines. And we do need poll monitors. Next slide, please. And please become a member if you're not already. Please become a member. Our members are the lifeblood of our organization. And with that, I just want to thank everyone for coming. Our incredible panelists, Dr. Deborah. So thank you, André, Pooja, Kayla, Terry. All of you are just wonderful and inspiring. The one thing I can say about our Voting Rights Coalition and our boards of elections is we have a North Star. We align ourselves around the voters. And so we'll continue to do that. Join us next Monday for another great discussion. Thank you so much. Have a good night.
Good night, all.